Good afternoon. I am Anto Budiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday afternoon to try and figure out what the future is for smart buildings as they become smarter over time. Just in case you're wondering who we are, our profiles are listed on mondaylive.org, so check that out. But also, most important is just to point out the views expressed here on this show the next hour are personal, not of any company or organization. Keep that in mind. Please do make this interactive with the chat and the Zoom chat so that we can have a really good conversation. And if you do want anything on this slide deck that I'm showing, it will be on mondaylive.org. And this being September, we are talking about buildings as assets, so we're going to be focused on that. We have a couple of guests that I'm going to bring on in a moment that will sort of start to uncover a little bit more about what that's all about. Specifically, our agenda, a little bit of news and chit chat. And then on the assets front, we're going to be sort of digging into ISO 55000, which is the standard way of thinking about assets. And we'll learn a lot about that in the next hour. But before we do that, I'm going to hand it over to Ken Sinclair to get an update from Automated Buildings.
Thanks, Anto. I really enjoyed last Monday's session. I think it was pretty obvious when we were organizing it that I wasn't a big fan of going into the asset and briar patch, but I was pleasantly surprised at how it got portrayed. And yes, lots of interesting stuff. And I think it's definitely a path we need to go down. So we created a summary of last Monday's live Zoom, which is Building as Assets, the new era in smart building management. Basically, we let AI listen painstakingly to all of the script that was generated and basically come up with what the salient points was. And I'm starting to admire the patience of AI to actually listen to us all talking and actually make some sense out of it, which excites me. That we can actually make sense of all of this. Sometimes we have all these little bits and pieces and we have our biases. And I think this is what we need, is to try and bridge over that. Mike did a great job, and we're looking forward to him providing more information on today's meeting. We've got a few new directions on automated buildings. The healthy building beyond the four walls. This article got fairly good traction, and so much so that it actually changed. We actually are going to have a session at AHR Expo about that, because we think that is a trend, and that got echoed back by our contributing editor over in the right-hand corner there, who was off to the London's PropTech connection. Connect, yeah. And that was sort of a message that came back from there too, that Europe is starting to look a lot more beyond the physical asset side, I guess, but also maybe the physical asset side starts to include how it fits with the community and how it resonates with the people. And another one that we put out there is the obsolescence and legacy planning for smart building systems. I think that's been a big problem and will continue to be. This digital maturity, we have a lot of I'm phrasing it, digital manure that we basically have been accumulating for the last 25 years. And I think we need to unravel that and try and turn that into digital maturity And that's a complex situation because we have to bridge all of these obsolescent systems and legacy systems. We have to make hard decisions as to when to throw them away and when to keep them. And unfortunately or fortunately, the direct digital industry has lived forever, and the products have proven to be reliable and still working 30, 40 years later. And that's good news and it's bad news because they were designed as control systems, and now we're strongly requiring them to be communication systems and to gather data, and they're falling down in that section. So we're getting overlays of data systems on top of control systems, and there's a bit of messiness there that we need, as an industry, we need to clarify and pull out. The other thing we're hard at is we've got pretty much all of our sessions approved for AHR Expo February in Orlando, and we're just firming up our speakers now and trying to get that all, trying to get everybody get their time slot and get their messages fitting in with the programs that we've had to get pre-approved. So we'll be working on that. Back to you, Anto.
Thank you, Ken. I love the idea of digital manure. Not quite sure what to do with it.
No shit.
Wondering if it's actually compost that we can actually use.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a difference between manure and mature.
Okay, let's move on, shall we? The link board here, in case you want any of the links to any of the sort of important sites and events coming up. And an opportunity for anyone else to bring up anything of interest.
Yeah. I might mention this. I posted a thing promoting one of our sponsors, AB&B, and they've been working with KNX, and we've not really had a big touch with KNX, but it does exist in Europe and everywhere else, quite significant. And I think we're starting to see that reflection come back, and I was quite surprised that it went to the top of our trending for the week kind of thing. So that's an interesting thing. I'm trolling the internet pretty close these days, so I'm starting to see what resonates and what doesn't. I'm not sure that the fact that post resonates, how that relates to business or financial gain, but it certainly is interesting to watch it. We certainly seem to be attracting more interesting followers. I don't think the numbers, we're not going viral, but we are getting good interest from global folks. The global, I think, is another, I meant to mention that when we were talking about the London PropTech show, is everything we do is exposed to global. Now you can't work in North American isolation as we did in the past. So that's an interesting thing too. I think as soon as you post any of your information, it's out there in the world. So we kind of have to think a little bit more about that and maybe start to understand what the world is doing, not just ourselves.
Agreed. It's a big market now to consider. So let us move on and start talking about buildings as an asset. And I'm going to bring on Mike Bordenero, who was with us last week, and I'm going to bring on the other guys. Hey, Mike. And Keith is here as well.
There we go.
Mike, so I'm going to stop my share because I don't have any slides, and so we can bring everybody on, and also going to bring on David Totman. But Mike, I'm gonna hand it over to you to take us from here.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me again, and thank you for focusing on asset management. I love what Ken said, not only about coming over to asset management and understanding that, but a couple of things he said. The Asset Leadership Network is not a big organization either, but boy, are we really happy with the minds that are attracted to the message that we are sharing and how they are building it. So we very much parallel what you guys are doing. And Ken, also, we started off to influence the US federal government regarding asset management and to educate the US, but we instantly became a global organization because you just can't be local anymore. And I think that really helps what I see asset management as being the ultimate goal of, which is that the one asset we all share is the earth. And it's through automated system controls and things that you guys are doing that's going to really help preserve that one asset. And so I like that. But David Totman is one of the minds that has been attracted to the Asset Leadership Network. And I'm so happy that he was able to take time to join with us. And he's got so much going on. He's with the American Society of Civil Engineers, the Aspen Institute. I'm not exactly sure how he's involved in this paper that's being written for the White House, but I think it would be good to bring him on. Oh, and he's with the American Society of Civil Engineers. He is their liaison to the ISO 55000 technical committee. So he's really got the civil engineer's eye on what asset management means to their infrastructure type projects. And he's got an engineer systems mindset. So even though it's not HVAC and automated building systems, you're going to enjoy talking with him. Is that good enough introduction?
That's great. David?
Yeah. Well, hey, everybody. David Totman. As Mike said, when Mike kind of introduced me to this group, I was kind of like, you have the wrong guy. I'm kind of more of a pipes guy, horizontal linear assets, but I have done, vertical buildings when I was at Colorado Springs Utilities. I ran the asset management program there. So I'm used to both horizontal and vertical, and I realized I had the right hair color for this group. So I feel at home. Yeah, a little bit. I guess my background been pretty much in water for over 40 years. Practiced water, worked with organizations in 21 countries. So have a global perspective, but I've been a civil servant, a scientist, and former big tech in both big companies, Esri, the GIS people, and also Autodesk, which you might be familiar with the whole BIM initiative, the building information modeling. And so, I've been kind of a long career dealing with physical infrastructure. I've been in the American Society of Civil Engineers for, well over a decade plus. I came up through their geomatics division, which is kind of their mapping and surveying, and was privileged to be their 2019 president of their Utility Engineering Surveying Institute. I continue to serve on their sustainability technical committee, their research policy committee, and as Mike said, I'm the voting member to the U.S. Technical Advisory Group to TC 251, which is the author of the ISO 55000 standard. So been very much involved with ISO for quite some time. I just actually got back from the Aspen Institute in Aspen, Colorado, where we meet yearly to discuss policy issues. I am a senior fellow with the Asset Leadership Network and have known Mike for a while and thoroughly enjoy the interactions with them. And as Mike was saying, I was recently appointed, vetted, and nominated, vetted, and appointed to the White House Presidential National Infrastructure Advisory Committee, a subcommittee on infrastructural health. And we're quite active in buildings and actually hospitals. And we can dive into that if you want a little bit. But, you know, those that know ASCE, it's all about civil engineering. It's been around since 1852. So a little older than those of us on the call here. But they're very much into education, standards, which I think is part of your topic, policies, manuals of practice, certifications. We work with universities and ABIT accreditation for everyone graduating from universities. And they're probably quite well known for their report card on infrastructure, right? The America's Report Card for Infrastructure comes out every 4 years. The last one was in 2021. They're going to have one coming out in 25. They, you know, have talked about asset management. You know, recently, I guess 3 report cards ago, there was like no mention of asset management. 2 report cards ago, it showed up around like maybe 9 times in this massive report. And then the last one in 2021, you know, asset management popped up 30 times. So civil engineering is getting understanding of asset management principles. They've never mentioned an AMP, an asset management plan yet, you know, but at least we're gaining ground in talking about full life cycle management, which is very critical, I think, in buildings. And this is kind of then bringing in the whole concept, you know, usually civil engineers are all about design and build. And this is getting into asset management, gets them into understanding specifically operations, right? How is this asset going to be used, right? You know, specific to the report card, the current overall grade for America is a C minus. Now there is no specific building category that they report on, but you know, closest to that might be schools, right? And schools in America right now have a grade of a D plus, which is kind of ironic. That, you know, they're not quite failing, you know, but a D plus. And there are 84,000 schools with nearly 100,000 buildings. And of those, like 4 in 10 of those facilities or schools, buildings have no facility plan. And roughly 41% of all these schools have experienced or are reporting HVAC issues, right? So very, very appropriate to what you want to talk about. And what we can dive deeper into any of that. As far as ISO 55000 goes, you know, it's a global standard. Countries from all over the world kind of contribute. And I think the number one thing to think about, you know, is asset management. It's not a software, right? Everyone thinks, oh, you go buy software. No, it's not a software. It's a system of systems, as Mike kind of mentioned. But it's also both tangible and intangible. And it took me a while to wrap my head around that as a, you know, being involved in infrastructure. The standard can actually be applied to, you know, IP, intellectual property, music, software, all sorts of things. So both tangible and intangible assets. And when we say 55,000, there's actually a whole suite of standards. We don't bother listing all the numbers, but you know, there's 55,000, which is just an overview, kind of like the executive summary, the Cliff Notes for anyone that remember Cliff Notes back in school. 55,001's on requirements, 2 is on management systems, there's financial alignment, there's public policy, people, and recently data. 55,013 is about data as an asset, right? So, you know, again, lots of different applications of the standard. I think what's been important, like I said, civil engineers are having to understand full life cycle. Before you just had to worry about, I'm just going to design this pipe or design this building and I'm done. I don't care how it's used. Well, nowadays, the design has to be cognizant of how it's going to be used. And I think that's my, kind of last point on ISO 55000 is definitely, assets have intent. And, if there's no people and no service, there's no reason to have an asset, right? And so there's this symbiotic relationship. And that intent, that asset intent can change over time. Just because I designed and built this thing and tenants moved in, as we all know with COVID, commercial property is reinventing itself for intent. I have a quick little story, that kind of drives that point home. When I was in Colorado Springs, everyone knows about dams and reservoirs. I think, lakes, fishing, but hydropower. We had a reservoir on up in the mountains, Rocky Mountains, right there in Colorado. And this reservoir held water and we used it for our water supply. But we changed water rights from the Colorado to the Arkansas River. And because we did that, that reservoir could not impound water of the state anymore, right? So we had to poke a hole in this dam that was on the side of a mountain and drain all the water because we moved our water rights. And so rather than a dam and a reservoir, I now had this, earthen wall on the side of a mountain. We didn't tear it down. It was too costly to tear it down, so we just left it. But it was no longer a dam and a reservoir. It was just this weird rock wall, on the side of a mountain. And so it stopped being a reservoir. It stopped being an asset whose intent was to hold water because we moved water rights, right? So a completely administrative item changed the intent of this physical asset, right? And so again, assets change over time. And as talking to Mike and preparing for this kind of, and I should have asked, I just kind of jumped right into background, but I think I'll make some of these points and we'll kind of dive deeper. Mike mentioned the Aspen Institute, so I'm involved in water. And we kind of created what we call the Internet of Water Coalition, which I think is similar to your Buildings Coalition here. And the intent was really to share data. And I think Ken was talking about, data. These control systems are now having to communicate information. And really, this Internet of Water Coalition was formed to kind of be a hub of hubs, right? To share data. And then we quickly found out we couldn't talk to one another because we didn't have a standard. And we pretty much adopted the OGC, Open Geospatial Consortium's WaterML standard, right? Because we needed to move data between different systems, different organizations, different softwares, and we needed that standard. So we adopted, I say, a global standard, WaterML2, so we could kind of facilitate that. So we had the apples to apples sort of comparison, right? Very specific to buildings. I'm former Autodesk, part of the big tech, and they, of course, do buildings, design buildings, their software, that is, I should say. They've been doing that for, over 3 decades. The building information modeling, it's all about objects and understanding, the hip bone, leg bone, foot bone, they're all connected for reasons. I was actually part of an acquisition. I was a, executive at a water modeling company that they purchased, and they quickly found themselves into, the plan and operate, the bookends of design make. So plan, design, make, build, operate, maintain. And there's a bit of a challenge of that for them to kind of think about, the bookends of that life cycle. They were so focused on design build, and they're having to think about, the other parts of that. And it really came to being, I think, as they jumped into AI. And so, AI seems to be on every conversation, every webinar, every podcast. And what they quickly realized to really benefit on the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning is it needed guardrails, right? Because AI can just run amok if it doesn't have guardrails. It can come up with really stupid ideas. And so it needs standards. And Autodesk found itself becoming a data company and common data environments, data models, and was very critical in their software on buildings called Tandem, is what is the operational state of, for buildings. So to gain energy efficiencies, and automation and optimization of space and all this connectivity with IoT, the Internet of Things, I think that Ken was alluding to, all of that really to enhance occupant safety and comfort, right? Again, assets have intent. A building, people need to be safe, they need to be comfortable. And then what is that long-term plan for maintenance and sustainability? So, a lot going on there. But it does all, kind of come into, standards, understanding the ability to communicate, understanding apples to apples and not apples to oranges, right? And so that's where ISO 55000 comes in, and it's, it doesn't tell you exactly how to do things. Everyone kind of morphs it to their own organization, but it requires people. It does require software, typically in this day and age, this digital day and age. But it requires leadership. It requires, understanding of why we're even doing what we're doing, right? So back to that, assets have an intent, and for buildings, that intent can be multifaceted, right? So anyway, I think I kind of, shut up and
No,
open
I think
it to the group here and go from there.
The intent comment is something that we've talked about for ever since Monday Live started. I think Mark Peacock here is known as Mr. Outcome, because that's usually the first words that come out of his mouth, speaking around this. So we understand that. I guess the question that I'd like to pose on behalf of this panel for this discussion is, how does this group, who's very unfamiliar with asset as a concept and very, very unfamiliar with 55,000, I think we've got kind of the bait a bit. There's something intriguing here. How do we start to think in the right way, or how do we start to think about using the asset framing of our sort of our situation? I don't know, Mike or David, either one can start.
Well, Mike, I think that's, I'll let you discuss, some of the struggles you're talking about, the government. And so basically Washington, D.C., I mean, talk about some of the challenges of the growing awareness of asset management in D.C.
Yes, that's definitely happened since we were formed in 2013 to start informing the federal government. Our founders were deeply entrenched in the federal government. Some were actual federal executives. So that gave us a good leg up in this really important area that impacts everything. And now we are not only reaching out to state and local governments, but to specific associations like this Coalition for Smarter Buildings. And what this Coalition for Smarter Buildings can do is realize that much of what is in the asset management standards, David listed that following the ISO format, the 00 document are the principles and terminologies and the why that you would be doing any of the ISO standards. And so why about asset management? And much of that is about the holistic approach. It's about communicating through all of the departments and having things be able to talk to each other, which is what this coalition is focused on. Then the 55,001 document, like all the other 001 documents, are the list of best practices to follow. What do you have to do in order to achieve improvement in quality or risk management or asset management, which is what ours is about. I'm trying to say it's not different than what you already know, but it's just applied to this list of best practices, involve all relevant stakeholders, have an information management system. That's something that you'll be able to focus on with the coalition. And then the 55,002 document is the examples of how to achieve what you have to do to have best practices. So that's the simple overview of the actual numbers game following the ISO numbers. What it does is shine the light on what you are already doing. If people listen to the coalition, if people have their building HVAC and automation systems help them achieve their intent, then they're going to get greater value out of their assets. So, Anto, to answer the question, it's really important to realize we're not asking anybody to do anything different. We're asking them to highlight what they are already doing in this universal context, this global context of asset management. I don't think anything that David said is foreign to anybody here.
No.
Yeah.
Steve, do you want to chime in? You're muted.
Yeah. So this is a question, I think, for you, David, particularly with your Autodesk background. So buildings are construction projects, whether they're retrofit or new construction, predominantly adhere to the CSI standard, which I would think you're familiar with, Construction Specification Institute standards.
Some, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yep, okay. So my question is, within and for the work that we do, there's a particular division that, or a couple divisions that we currently show up in. Yeah, but the point of any one of the divisions is that it's very common to refer to industry standards within the division document. Okay, so it could be a UL. You need to be UL certified. It's all sorts of things. So what I'm curious about is from what you're seeing with ISO 55000, do you see where there will be a marriage between the two, so that the CSI will start to encourage some of these divisions where it makes sense to incorporate ISO 55,000 language right into the specifications that go out to the industry for how to build a building, regardless whether it's civil engineering or control systems, because there's so many obvious overlaps in terms of assets, and that's where these assets are initially described by the architect and engineers who put the specs out. So what are your thoughts in that regard?
Well, it's been interesting, right? So being on the U.S. Technical Advisory Group, we're all focused on the asset management adoption, ISO 55,000 adoption in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we've all had to become pragmatists, because and as a former city employee, the proverbial do more with less, the inability to say no to the public, because not only we're a city utility, we're municipally owned, right? And so you couldn't say no. You had to keep the lights on. We had to keep the water running, all those things. We had to keep our service centers open, our billing centers open. And, so you're always, standards were always great, but we'd always say, oh, I don't have the time or money to do a standard. But really the underpinning piece to that, and as we try to promote ISO 55,000 in the US, we've softened, I think we've softened our approach to say, before it was like, you will do this. and you know, that doesn't go over well with a CEO or a city manager or somebody. You know, it's no one likes to be told exactly what to do, and so we'd say, you know, these are guidelines, right? And it's all about, you know, it's about understanding what I would call cause and effect, right? And it was never about, like, you know, everyone would say, you know, oh, saving money. It was more about risk. It was like, you know, making sure every dollar you spend is the best dollar it's going to be. And that's really where these standards come into play. Is no one likes wasting money, right? We don't like to just, you know, none of us, I don't think, are, you know, filthy rich where we can just throw money away. So we want to make sure every dollar we spend, you know, is going to the right thing. And we had a saying in asset management at the utility. You know, we had 100-year history. We're an older utility. We had 100-year history plus of you know, doing things right, right? Because we're very proud about how we did the job. So we knew we were doing things right, but was it actually the right thing to do? Because, you know, we had different divisions, and just like in a building, there's different groups. And it's like, it's a really hard thing if you're the building owner or the, you know, the asset manager of that building, is to say, you know, I have all these buckets on my budget, and I've always spent this much money on this and spent this much money on that, to actually say, well, I should probably spend less money here and move that over and start spending it here. And that's where I think all of these standards, it levels the playing field of actually trying to understand, you know, how best that dollar goes, you know, when I look at the building as a system of systems, right? And so
Yeah.
it's go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, and I appreciate what you're saying for sure, because you've mentioned the relationship between design and operations, right? So, and what asset management is purporting to do is to expand the focus beyond design to include operations, right?
Yes.
And so it just seems to me that the CSI approach, that is essentially the methodology that's been universally adopted in the building industry among the trades, would be a natural place for ISO 55000 to land in terms of the, how to basically influence the specifications such
Steve.
that the design language or this asset language becomes part of the specs.
Steve, can I take a crack at that?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so I'll answer your question about how CSI standards and asset management standards go together by talking about a different set of standards. So in the asset management system, ISO 55001 best practice requirements. One of the requirements is you shall have a risk management system. So you can plug in, if you're the owner of the organization, you can plug in, we will use the ISO, I think it's 44,000 risk management system. And now you have just met the requirements for the asset management system by referring to another set of standards. And then your answer then lists out everything that's in those ISO 44,000 standards about risk management. So it nestles in. And I think the answer isn't a matter of whether asset management includes CSI standards or if CSI standards include asset management. I think they kind of can reference each other back and forth. And it can seem a little bit onerous and complicated to have standards referring to each other, but the tools and technologies we have now make this a whole lot easier. And I think that's why people are.
I agree, Mike. I'm just saying it's the CSI documentation refers to lots of standards that ANSI and UL, and it just goes on and on and on. So there's no shortage of reference standards in CSI documentation.
Yeah,
that's my point. So it just seems like this would be a natural place for ISO 55000 to land in, and just I'm asking the question is
Yeah.
as to whether anybody is, either the asset leadership or is there any effort going on to engage, consulting firms in this effort to try and leverage ISO 55000 into the CSI world so that it becomes sort of just a natural extension of what they're already doing?
We work a lot
So-
with National Institute of Building Sciences, and CSI is part of the National Institute of Building Sciences.
Okay.
And so it's not a direct to the Construction Specification Institute
Mhm.
connection, but there is efforts to incorporate it in the building industry.
Okay.
And we should do something similar like what we're doing with the coalition with CSI. And like we have involvement with the American Society of Civil Engineers through David. We should probably reach out to get somebody from CSI. That's a real good idea.
If
David
I
Bill?
could jump in, Steve, you bring up a really great point, and those requirements of tying things from the final construction documents and final deliverables to the asset management 55,000 standards actually are included in another ISO standard called 19650, which are the BIM standards.
BIM standards. Yeah.
And at 19651 through 5, basically the directive is that these things are called employer information requirements, or they used to be. Now they're called exchange information requirements, or EIR. And so your exchange information requirements go into your appointment documents, AKA your RFP. So your RFP that you're hiring your design team, your architects and engineers, and your RFP for the construction team should include an EIR, which says, this is what we want back in this format, and this is how you have to do it. And architects and engineers, as well as general contractors, in their bid response, put together what's called a BIM execution plan. Historically, the BIM execution plans, they're putting in whatever the F they want to serve their own purposes. The EIR is meant to say to the bidders, here's what we want. The BIM execution plan is intended to be a response to the EIR saying, yes, we're going to do this. Yes, we're going to do that. Yes, we're going to do that. And so these things can absolutely go all wed together and woven together. But this is a great example of how the baton handoff is pretty shitty between the design team and the construction team to the operations team, because the owner in the original appointments document didn't have any of this stuff in there. So if you have it at the beginning, it waterfalls down through the whole process. And then one other thing to add is it's not just the CSI specs, it's also uniformat with the assemblies. So it's your wall assemblies, curtain wall assemblies, but also your air handling unit and chiller tower should have a uniformat standard too. And that's a way of doing it to a specific asset that's part of the larger asset. CSI specs are usually for the whole system and don't drill into the individual components of the system necessarily. Uniformat is designed to do that. So you should have in your appointment document / RFPs an EIR that has both uniformat and master format requirements, as well as all the 55,000 requirements, and 27,000 if they're doing project management too. And Mike and David, nice to meet you guys.
Yeah. Hi.
So
Oh, Mike, we've met, but David, nice to meet you.
this is Mark. So I want to kind of shift this while we've got Mike and David here. You guys are talking about specs and standards, all important. Great. That's not me. My world is the business side of all this. So for Mike and David, couple questions for you is, if I'm a building owner, I'm an operator, I'm a REIT, and I own multiple properties, what is the asset management going to do for the value of my building as an asset? the market value, the book value, the intrinsic value, liquidation value, replacement value. As a owner operator today, that's extremely important, is maintaining the value of my said property. So, can you guys comment on asset management as it relates to asset value?
David?
Right?
You can go first, and I'll
Okay.
jump in. I definitely jump in.
So that's the perfect question. So thank you for that. The last week I mentioned that the breakthrough language from ISO 55000 was defining an asset as anything that gives value to an organization. And frequently, if you are going to initiate an asset management initiative, you get together the people, all the different departments, and in a big REIT or something, that meeting may be the first time all these different people have met each other. And that seems strange, but that is common. And you would think that REITs and large owners know what they have. They don't. Most large owners don't know all the equipment they have in a building. And if they do know the equipment, they don't know the conditions of them. And so having an asset registry for buildings helps people know what they have, what the conditions of their systems are, and what's needed. And if you are a REIT that has kept your HVAC systems and your elevators and escalators maintained and up to date, then having an asset management plan and system that shows all that information is going to help you retain that value. And instinctively, we think that's what everybody has. That is not what everybody has. So a lot of what we're doing, what asset management does, is just say, use your common sense. So much of this is just common sense, but it's common sense about a lot of different issues packed into one document that you can go down the checklist and say, we've got this, we've got this. We don't have this. We have this, but it's not very good. And then you get to say, what are we going to do about it? It's like having the maintenance record for your vehicle. If you have every oil change listed, then you're going to get a higher value on your resale.
So is there discussion, to your point, and yeah, I think all of us would agree that owners, operators, REITs have no clue of what they actually have within their buildings. That's been the challenge ever since we started talking about buildings. But I guess where I'm going from this is that as you guys are looking at this, can you come up with a formula that says, if you have a asset management program that consists of A, B, C, D, and E, it should add 10% to the value of my building. Instead of 50, it's worth 25 million. I have this asset management. I've got all the records, everything you just said. It should add another 10% to the value of that building. And then me as an owner, I go to unload it and sell it. I can demand, or I would expect to get 10% more than what I might put it on if I did not have asset management.
And what about reduced insurance rates?
That risk mitigation, all
Right.
of these, those are, I look at those are the intangible values. I'm looking at tangible value. And as an owner operator, as a CEO, CFO, what do we look at? Numbers.
Yeah, this is great. And yes, as the asset management industry matures, that is exactly where we want to get. But as I frequently say, the most famous speech in the world starts 77 years ago, because it took 87 years to go from the idea to actually, we mean it, all men are created equal. So we are still in the beginning, and your vision is in line with our vision. There isn't anything that you can go out and plug in right now to give you that value.
Thank you.
So I guess, what I would add, Mark, was I think what I learned, at when I was at the utility with, book value was, gone. It had already been, everything was depreciated. We were so old that it was like, okay, book value wasn't the conversation. Replacement value, rehabilitation and asset management was protecting the value of the dollar, the value of the asset for tomorrow, right? Not just today, right? It's like, okay, and I think COVID kind of put an entire awakening about, understanding the extremes of tomorrow, right? And you want that. I mean, I think, Mark, you were the one talking about seeing beautiful, multi-century old buildings and how they potentially have adapted over the years, for that, again, that back to that intent. And I think that's asset management is a rigor. There's no exact formula. The formula is more a qualitative than quantitative. And that's the elusive multi-million dollar question, is quantitative, but it is a qualitative formula and mindset for value of tomorrow, right? And not knowing whatever is going to be thrown at you, right? So it's that, and I want to go into sustainability, resiliency, all that, there's buzzwords, it's all about, are you prepared for whatever the hell's going to be thrown at you, tomorrow, next decade? And is that building going to be prepared, right? So to the maintenance records, everything Mike talked about, that's data, right? And with data, we do trending, and we can kind of understand, and there's a whole new world of what we call, digital twins, that it's just in cyberspace, we're recreating the physical world. And it's none of those are about the boring, mundane, within spec. Those digital twins really help answer the questions of like, oh my God, what happens if it snows in Los Angeles in March, right? Which actually happened. I have video of snow in my backyard in LA, right? But from March of last year, it's like no one in a million years would think, oh, it's going to snow in LA. And like with the floods and everything else we've got going on, these digital twins allow you to think, throw just stupid stuff at them, right? And say, can it respond? And I think that's really what asset management's doing, is preparing you more for tomorrow than it is for today. Today is just standard operations. SOPs do that. Manuals of practice do that. But preparing that mindset and that value as a building owner for tomorrow, what is this thing going to look like in 20 years, right? And you run just, again, the boring, mundane, okay, that's fine. That's good on investment strategy. But, you want to throw the strangest outcomes. And the way we got digital tools these days, we can do financial, structural, environmental, social, all sorts of things can be modeled and thrown at these things to understand the value of the building for future ownership.
I love what you said about rigor, because that's what this group is looking for. The discipline of managing the automation systems, the HVAC systems. And you all know the value of that. By understanding these asset management principles and practices, and saying that you support asset management in this way, that's what gets you up to the C-suite. And as I said last week, sell the concept that you fit in with the asset management approach, because you do. You check the boxes for information management system, you check the boxes for risk management, you have the operational processes in place, it all works within your system. But by attaching it to asset management and saying that you are just an example of what they can do for all of their assets, for all of their systems, then you can have that conversation with the decision makers that you really want to be talking with.
Yeah, a quick anecdotal story, again, because of COVID, and I was in tech, And we had tools, AI tools, and this is specific to water, actually treatment plants. So both water and wastewater treatment plants. So the buildings with their filter trains and the processes in these buildings. We had some AI tools that we thought, oh, it's energy saving, save money on energy costs. And everyone, we thought, oh, that's going to be the moneymaker, right? Well, COVID hits, and it turned out that it was actually chemical dosage that was the savior in some of that, because the global market for like chlorine and other chemicals that the treatment plant needed to operate all of a sudden locked up, disappeared, right? Global supply chain. We're no longer our self-contained US economy. We are a global factor. And we literally had treatment plants up and down the Mississippi, like being no more longer treatment plants because they couldn't get chemicals, right? So the actual intent of the facility was at risk because they couldn't get chemicals. No one thought, chlorine, I can always buy chlorine. No, in COVID, it like shut down. And there were some communities at serious risk of no longer having like treated water because the treatment plants themselves couldn't get the supply chain to feed the building, right? And it would lose its intent, right? And so
You guys know all about fluorocarbons. I don't know if I said that right, but
So we're starting to get approaching the top of the hour.
yeah.
I'd like to start to wrap this up. Jim, I know that you think a lot about assets and this sort of angle, the financial angle. Do you want to sort of wrap up what you've heard here today?
Well, I think there are a lot of interesting standards out, and they apply to a lot of different areas. The problems seem to be fairly fundamental in nature. I, like Mark, I'm very interested in the financial aspect and how we can do it. But I've also, been interested over time in how we change the conversation. One difference between infrastructure, civil engineering, and these big projects and what we do is the maintenance component. Maybe it's not that different, but what we're talking about primarily for asset management is operating money, operating dollars going forward. And in our particular industry, there aren't any. They're heavily minimized. Most of the money that flows in our industry is for new construction. So we're very interested in figuring out how we can use asset management to change the subject and get people, especially building owners and people that are responsible for running these assets, to have operating budgets, as we believe that the operating costs of the building are really the major focus going forward.
I'm working with the United Nations on an article about the financing that they're doing for developing nations, and it is exactly that same thing. They can't just give money for a new project. It now has to be incorporated. So that's where our Washington, D.C. activities come into place, where we can start working to have legislation like the MAP 21, Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century. It's transit bills for trains and buses and that type of thing. And they have to have an asset management plan in order to get the funding. And an asset management plan requires what you just said. What is the ongoing? So there is a small movement in that right direction. And I'm working with somebody else to write an article on how to do that more.
Yeah. And I know we're at the top of the hour, but it's like, that's asset management 101 was, right. When you look at these 100-year assets, right, capital is only 14% of the overall cost, and the other, percentage is O&M. And it's like, capital's cheap. It's credit, like when you check out at the grocery, you see it used to be, cash or credit, or, paper or plastic. Was like credit's cheap. I got bonds. Cash is what was precious, and that's O&M, right? And so just like these treatment plants losing chlorine because of supply chain, that's an O&M cost, right? And so you have asset management is the rigor to say this is how this asset's going to run, 50 years from now. And it's all about O&M, not capital. Because I have to operate and maintain, and that includes employers, right, or the workers. That includes, the electricity, the water, all those costs projected out over time, because I'm going to have, cash is not readily available typically. We're kind of almost all on fixed budgets, right? So asset management, it gets a bad rap for being capital only. It's also about O&M.
Yes, yeah. For sure.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
I think that's a nice way to wrap this up. And Rick didn't get an opportunity to mention TXO, but maybe next week, because that's all obviously related to all of this. So
Next week.
next week. Great. So we'll continue the conversation on asset next week for the rest of September. But for now, thank you very much, David and Mike, for this discussion. Really helpful. So we'll get the video on this out tomorrow, Wednesday. And with that, wishing you all a great week. Bye-bye.
Thank you all for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.